King. This is Houston. Please call Endeavor for a voice check.
Endeavor, this is King. Can you hear us?
You're loud and clear, King.
Okay, it sounds like you're all ready to go, and we'll go into this. If I can direct this first question to Stephen Oswald, I'd like to get a bit of a sense from you as to really, in a nutshell, why is this mission so important? Because you're embarking on not one but a whole smorgasbord of different experiments here.
Well, we've got a full plate. Certainly, the ultraviolet astronomy community is excited about this flight. And part of the reason that this flight is so important is because we basically cannot get this kind of information from the ground because the ultraviolet data from these distant celestial objects just can't get through our atmosphere. So in order to observe these, we have to get up above the Earth's atmosphere. And Hubble can do that, but they have an instrument that doesn't reach as far into the high-frequency, high-energy part of the ultraviolet spectrum as the instruments do that we have on board here. So this is the kind of information that they just can't get from the ground, and none of the other orbiting instruments can get it either.
Now, a question for John Grunsfield. You have been working with this equipment. Essentially, is this really the first time we have been able to look at distant novas, at quasars, these celestial bodies in this way?
Well, the instruments we're carrying aboard here on Astro 2 are the same instruments that flew on Astro 1. So we had a peek at some of these objects on Astro 1, but particularly the HUD instrument is much improved over we flew on Astro 1, and we're getting a whole lot more better quality time on the targets. There's also another satellite called the International Ultraviolet Explorer, and it can do similar things but in much more crude ways. So this is the first time that astronomers have really been able to get a look at these objects with the kind of quality that we get from the big mountaintop observatories. So this is an extremely exciting time for astronomers all over the world.
Now, John Grunsfield, I know they're saying that they will be looking at the data that you have been able to gather so far. They'll be analyzing that for years. You've only been up there for a few days, though you have been using these 3 ultraviolet telescopes. What have you been able to see so far that really surprises you? Anything yet?
Well, it's a little hard from the data that we have on board to see anything that really surprises us. I think a couple of the targets that we've looked at have been particularly exciting. Last night we looked at Jupiter, and specifically we were looking at some of the plasma that encircles Jupiter, and we were able to see that data on board, and we weren't sure whether we'd be able to. And it's really exciting because there are currently some active volcanoes on the moon of Jupiter, Io, and I think that's very exciting for a lot of folks. And in this last shift, we were able to do a simultaneous observation of the Jupiter environment with the Hubble Observatory. And when you can do 2 observatories like that at once, Astro 2 in the ultraviolet and the Hubble Observatory in the optical, you get much more information than you do with one observatory alone.
Now, Stephen Oswald, you, of course, are essentially the person at the controls of the shuttle. One of the things that you have to do is try to keep these telescopes on target. And having seen some simulations earlier in the week, it would seem like you would constantly have to be adjusting the shuttle so the telescopes would be aimed correctly. Is that a difficult job?
Well, actually, the job of controlling the orbiter is relatively straightforward. We put the orbiter in an attitude that will allow the instrument pointing system in the Astro payload to fine-tune the pointing of the telescopes on these objects. And the kind of control that we were having to do earlier on in the mission, which was just basically almost a ground-controlled approach, was measured in the thousandths of degrees. And we control the orbiter. We can't control it down to, maybe 300ths of a degree, but we can't get the pointing accuracy that we need to do this astronomy with the orbiter alone. We need to use the instrument pointing system. So my job as the commander of this mission is almost to stay out of everybody's way here. I've got 6 real talented folks, Wendy and Bill, to run the orbiter and point it, and the 4 science folks to come back and run the observatory. So I just try to stay out of their way and keep the home fires burning.
Well, as you've been looking out the window of the orbiter, have you seen Bellingham pass below?
You know, I I haven't, and there's a real good reason for that on this mission. Our inclination is 28.5 degrees, and we just plain don't get far enough north to see it. But my first two missions were at 56 degrees, which of course gets us high enough to see it, and I had, like 11 opportunities to see it on the first flight and 13 opportunities on the second flight. Never did see it because there was a blanket of clouds over the northwest, which almost never happens, of course.
Of course not. Bellingham is about as far away as you can get and still stay within the United States from the Cape. Of course, where we've been looking for decades now, it's space launches. How did you ever get interested in this, or did you want to be an astronaut as a kid growing up out here?
Well, I really didn't. I wasn't one of the folks, and we have several in the office who wanted to be an astronaut for as long as they can remember. And I wasn't one of those, primarily because when they were hauling the Gemini capsules around early on, there were a number of times I had an opportunity to see it, and it was small enough, and looking at my dad's size at about 6 feet, a little bit over, I just really had no desire to get into the thing. But I always wanted to fly airplanes, and later on had a chance to do that with the Navy, and they started selecting shuttle pilots when I was doing test pilot work at the Texan River, and then I really got interested, and that was about 1978.
Now, this is your third shuttle mission, and you're scheduled to fly at least one more after this. Is this getting to be as routine as doing some of those carrier takeoffs and landings as you did as a Navy pilot?
Well, I don't think that either of those two events ever really got to be routine, flying off the carriers and certainly not shuttle flights. I wish I was scheduled for another shuttle flight, but we generally don't schedule folks for another flight before they get back from the one that they're on. So if that comes along in the future, that'd be great. And I don't think you could ever get tired of this. This is just an absolutely awesome experience, and the perspective that you get on the world from this vantage point is one that I could certainly never get tired of, and I think most folks feel that way.
Let me throw this next question over to Ron Parise. You are a payload specialist aboard Endeavor. One of the experiments going on here is something called MACE, and I think we actually saw some pictures. You were showing some video, I think, of the MACE experiment, if that's what I was looking at. What is MACE, and why is it important?
Well, I'm probably the wrong one to ask that. Steve has been operating the MACE experiment, so I'll give it back to him.
Okay.
I guess what MACE stands for Mid-Deck Active Control Experiment, and what it is an apparatus that simulates having two different kinds of sensors on a spacecraft, one being a scanning type instrument and the other one being a pointing instrument. And the problems that we have on some spacecraft where you do that is that the scanner, which mechanically bangs from stop to stop, will often disturb the pointing quality of the other experiment. And what we can do is try to actively control that second experiment so that its pointing accuracy is not degraded. But doing that in 0G is different than doing it down in 1G. And this is really the first time that folks have had a chance to take a complex instrument into orbit and control actively the pointing end and then get data. We ship it down to the ground on our comm system, and the folks at MIT look at it and redo their algorithms and uplink us some new equations. We put those in and run the same experiment again with a different set of equations. So it's really exciting, and it may end up paying off really big for us later on down the line in the design of future spacecraft.
How will that help you? Give me sort of a layman's explanation of how this will yield benefit.
Well, say on the space station, if you have an experiment that requires very, very pristine microgravity, 10 to the minus 6 Gs, meaning that it needs to just be very quiescent. If you have activity going on the space station, like people living on it, ends up doing considerable damage to that kind of microgravity. If we can actively control that microgravity environment by a computer, then we can get better data and still live in that environment as we would essentially on Earth. So there are untold numbers of applications of actively controlling the environment for the instruments that we fly in space.
Now, you are doing a lot of microgravity experiments. Again, you're looking at the potential applications for drugs, for crystals, commercial applications for this. Microgravity experiments, of course, have been ongoing since some of the earlier shuttle missions. How will this mission help advance that research?
Well, the crystal growth experiments that we have on board are follow-ons to those that you mentioned earlier that have flown on previous shuttle missions. And basically, we're trying to solve puzzles with this. The folks that do the protein crystal growth experiments, say, are doing X-ray diffraction on those crystals that we can grow here on orbit that can't be grown successfully in 1G because they're just too delicate. And so we grow those crystals on orbit, and those folks go off and try to understand better the makeup of those protein crystals so that they can manufacture drugs that can either inhibit or enhance the characteristics of that particular protein. And that's an iterative process. And so we continue to try to grow them better and better crystals and crystals of proteins that they haven't had a chance to look at yet, so that they can hopefully get some clues on how to make better drugs so that we have a better life on Earth.
Now, one of sort of a northwest angle to this next question, which is the follow-on to the shuttle, essentially, which is the space station. The Boeing company, of course, has been given the contract to manage the space station, to help build parts of it, to help get it into the air. In terms of what you are doing now, do you feel like you're how much of a step forward and closer to the space station are we getting because of what you were able to now accomplish onto this mission? Is there any connection there?
Well, there is, in that we are the longest shuttle mission that we will have flown to date. And the more data that we get on keeping folks on orbit in a zero-G environment, the better off that we are. Certainly all these flights that we fly contribute to our knowledge base on living and working in space. Until we get a space station, though, I don't think that we're really going to have all the information that we need to move on to the next logical steps, which would be going back to the moon and then maybe on to Mars.
Do you think you'll make it on a space station mission?
Well, you never know. It's we should be starting to launch those missions in the 97, 98 time frame and have a permanent man capability by just after the turn of the century. So I'm getting older, but I'm not that old yet, and it may be that that'll happen.
Well, how does everybody feel so far? As you did point out, this is going to be the longest shuttle mission. I see smiling faces there. It sounds like everybody's getting a lot done, and things are going smoothly. Does it feel like it looks from here on the ground?
Yeah, I think everybody feels real good. We after you get up here, it takes about a day or so to get yourself oriented to the zero-G environment, and after about the second day, what's scary is it starts feeling normal to be like this, and you're going from the flight deck to the mid-deck, head first down through the hatch, and kind of flying around the cabin, and it just starts feeling normal. And certainly by 8 days into the flight where we are now, it's everybody's very comfortable with it, and we're all feeling good.
Do you think they will extend the flight by 2 days? There was some reports that you were hoping to be able to make a longer mission out of it.
Well, there are a lot of targets out there. We haven't run out of stars yet to look at, and so we hope that we can stay up here a little bit longer. It's a lot of trouble to get here, and we trained for a year to get here, and so we wouldn't have our feelings hurt at all if they left us up here a little bit longer. But we will certainly come home whenever they tell us that it's time, and we'll be glad to be back home too, because there are a lot of folks down there that we don't get to see now.
Will it be easy to get used? You've been on these missions before. How difficult will it be to get used to being back on the ground again?
It takes a day or two to get used to that. And the funny thing is that after 40-plus years of living on the ground, it's almost as difficult to get used to going back to the Earth as it is coming up from the Earth to space. So, including even just sleeping back in 1Gs. But after a day or two, you start getting your strength back, and it's really like you never left.
Okay, thanks again, Houston. King, we are out.
We're ready, Houston.
WOR WOR, this is Houston. Please call Endeavor for a voice check.
All right, Endeavor, this is WOR. How do you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear. This is Endeavor.
All right, lady and gentlemen, Wendy Lawrence is Lieutenant Commander on the Space Shuttle Endeavor, and Dr. Samuel Durrance is a payload specialist. They are alive with us this morning here on Rambling with Gambling. Lieutenant Commander, good morning from New York City.
Good morning, New York, from Endeavor.
Lieutenant Commander, where are you at the moment on your orbit?
Currently, we're over the Pacific Ocean. We just passed to south of the Hawaiian Islands. Probably about another 5 to 10 minutes or so, we'll be crossing the western coast of South America.
South America, and then you will be near New York in about 15 minutes.
Unfortunately, our orbital inclination is such that we won't pass directly over New York. However, the other members of my crew last night said that they had a beautiful pass along the East Coast and got to see, they thought up as far as D.C., but not quite into New York.
All right, have you passed over New York City in your travels, which are about halfway through your planned mission?
No, unfortunately, we will not be able to do that. Our orbital inclination is at a latitude of 28.5 degrees. Basically, where Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center are located, we're on what we call a low inclination flight. The high inclination flights, however, do get a chance to fly over New York, so perhaps on my next flight I'll have that opportunity.
Lieutenant Commander, before I talk with Dr. Durrance, tell us your impression of this experience and really watching the Earth pass by you every 90 minutes.
I wish I could find the appropriate words to describe just how beautiful the Earth is. In fact, right now we're experiencing a sunrise, and from up here we can see sometimes 10 to 15 different layers of the atmosphere, and the colors are just spectacular. It's like nothing I've ever seen down on Earth. And I've seen some beautiful sunsets on the Pacific Ocean, but nothing beats what it's like up here in space. It's absolutely fantastic.
Even the weather, when I have seen pictures from the Space Shuttle of thunderstorms, are absolutely glorious to see.
They are. In fact, yesterday we had an opportunity to pass over a volcano in the Andaman Island chain, which is just to the west of India in the Bay of Bengal, and that was really a spectacular sight also.
Dr. Samuel Durrance is the payload specialist, one of the payload specialists. And by the way, we are talking live with the Space Shuttle Endeavor here this morning on WOR. Dr. Durrance, explain what you do as payload specialist.
Well, my job is to operate the telescopes that are part of the Astro Observatory. I've been working with them for a number of years. One of the telescopes, the Hopkins ultraviolet telescope, I helped to design and build. And I worked with the team putting together the Astro Observatory, so I know quite a bit about it. And early on in the program, it was decided that it was more efficient, and you would come out with a more reliable mission to train someone who has that much in-depth knowledge with the actual instrumentation that you're using to train as an astronaut and take on board and to help operate the observatory. So that's what I've been doing really for the past 11 years.
I understand that with the telescopes that you have aboard Endeavor in the back, if you will, in the cargo bay, you have been able to see some things never before seen. A quasar that is figured to be at the edge or near the edge of the universe. Do you find as you circle and conduct these experiments that those big questions about how big the universe is, what might be beyond it, what makes it up, are even more what's the word? Even larger than they are when we peer into the heavens from Earth?
Well, you certainly have a feeling of awe and inspiration as you're flying around circling the Earth. The thing that strikes you most, though, from orbit is not the stars, but the Earth itself. The view from orbit of Earth is truly breathtaking, and I think very few people who have been able to see this have not been emotionally affected by it. And the deep questions that we have, I think, are really enforced by being up in space and looking back at the Earth and seeing how beautiful and how fragile it is, and looking just above the Earth and seeing the blackness of space, and it's just a beautiful island of life isolated in the universe.
How has life been aboard the Space Shuttle? You are about halfway through this mission. Is it at all uncomfortable, or is it just a natural setting for all of you?
No, it's very natural. There are 7 of us in a fairly small area, like about the size of a Winnebago, and so we have to live in fairly close quarters, but we all get along fairly well, and the feeling of weightlessness is very natural once you get used to it. In fact, when you come back, you feel very odd with having to hold yourself up against this strange force. It's a lot of fun, of course, being able to float around, and it feels very natural.
Wendy Lawrence is Lieutenant Commander of the Space Shuttle Endeavor. Lieutenant Commander, what's it like to fly this? I guess your real work comes when you come back to Earth.
So my job on board this mission is that of the flight engineer, so I assist the commander and the pilot during the real dynamic phases of flight, which are ascent and entry, and the commander is the one who will actually land a vehicle, and that's certainly a challenge after you've been up here for 16 days and you haven't had an opportunity to practice, but both the commander and the pilot of this flight are very, very fine aviators, and it makes my job quite easy. I just back them up on the procedures, but during the orbital phase of flight, that's when I have a little bit of an opportunity to act as the pilot of the blue shift. So as someone who's got a background in flying helicopters, this certainly is the thrill of my lifetime to actually sit in the front 2 seats of the orbiter and have an opportunity to input the maneuvers and allow the onboard computers to fire the maneuvering jets and put us in the proper attitude.
When do you and Sam and the rest of the crew get the opportunity to sit around the kitchen table and talk over lunch, breakfast, or whatever?
Well, we're actually working at 2 shifts. The other shift is asleep right now. We work about 12 hours a day, so unfortunately, many of your meals are spent while you're working, but what we enjoy the most is just the views out the window. In fact, right now it's sunrise. We're out over the Pacific, and it's beautiful blue waters and white puffy clouds. And when you feel like you need a break, you just look out the window.
Well, I'm visualizing this, that there you are in the Space Shuttle Endeavor, and I'm thinking of almost a bus with its line of windows, and the 7 of you are staring out the window all the time.
Well, as you can see, there are 2 of us here. There are 4 of us asleep, and 1 of us is working feverishly behind us. This is our crewmate, Dr. Tammy Jernigan, who is handling the operation of the telescope right now. We, of course, continue to operate even as we're talking to you. And so the windows are close to where we work, so it's nice to look out the windows, but that's not all we do.
Do you sleep well?
Oh, you do, and once you, like Sam said, once you get the hang of being weightless, it really feels a lot better. I think I've slept better up here than I slept down on the ground, and we do sleep in some modified sleeping bags that somewhat hold you in position, but you can definitely tell that you're just floating in the air, and I've found it to be quite comfortable and quite natural.
And Sam Durrance, live from the Space Shuttle Endeavor this morning here on Rambling with Gambling at WOR. Thank you very much. Best of luck in continued success in the rest of the flight.
Well, thank you. It's been great talking to you, and see you, and goodbye, New York.
Fairfield University, home of the famous Fairfield Stags. Please call Endeavor for a voice check.
Endeavor, this is Fairfield. How do you hear me?
Well, you're loud, just a little bit garbled, but we understand you, Fairfield.
We are ready with our questions. We have a bunch of students eager to talk to you.
Okay, we're looking forward to it. Send them on.
Chris Bannon. Your question.
You've been using the telescope to observe magnetic fields around white dwarf stars. How are you able to determine the magnetic fields, and what are the effects?
Let me let our resident astronomer answer that one. Hang on just a second.
Actually, we are observing quite a number of white dwarfs. That's one of the major programs of at least two of the telescopes, and magnetic fields show up in the spectra of the white dwarfs and the line shapes and structure of the spectral lines that we see. And so that's a very important program we have ongoing. We've observed several of them in the last few days.
Alan Benefit, your question.
How are small crises managed during the mission? And what is the sequence of steps that you take to resolve problems with malfunctioning equipment?
Could you repeat the first part of your question again, please?
How are small crises managed during the mission?
Oh, okay. Well, we inevitably run into minor problems that come along, and we are trained to handle most of those. Actually, we have worked through over the past 15 years or so that we've been flying the orbiter, most of the different kinds of problems that can come along, and we're trained to handle those. We have a number of malfunction procedures that are on board, and the same is true of the payload folks. They've trained for, actually, in the case of Sam Durant's and Ron Paris, for, the better part of a decade on this equipment, and they're well-versed in all the kinds of problems that you can have. So we take those on one at a time and work through them in cooperation with the folks on the ground to resolve whatever problem we have.
Chris Taylor, your question.
What exactly is involved in the mid-deck active control experiment, and how will that aid in the development of a future space station?
Well, as you know, one of the main reasons that we go to space is to obtain as pure a microgravity environment as we can. 10 to the minus 6 Gs is what we try to look for on the orbiter for crystal growing experiments and some of the life science experiments that we do. And the space station is going to be the same kind of operation. A lot of the operations that we're going to have to do will require a very quiescent environment. The problem is that having people on board tends to disrupt that quiescent environment. If we can control on the space station some of the areas where we're trying to do the very highly intensive microgravity work through active control and isolate them from the other movements that are going on board the space station, we will be much, much better off. And we're hoping that we can incorporate the technology that the folks at MIT are working on with the MACE experiment in the space station, as well as other satellites where we have, say, a scanning instrument on one end of the satellite bus and a pointing instrument on the other end of the satellite bus.
John Anderson.
We read in the mission status report that on day 4, the team observed a rapidly spinning star, 5 Persei, with perhaps a shell of gas around it. Is this a B star? And if so, why was the Whoopi most appropriate for this observation?
Well, you guys probably are a little further ahead of what our progress in solving some of these scientific problems are and what the status of our observations are than we are. We do get a little bit of a briefing back up of what the quality of the science is, but right now I don't have any details on the results of any of the individual observations that we've made, I'm afraid.
Virginia, your question.
As the space shuttle moves in its orbit, how does the instrument pointing system, the IPS, keep the telescopes pointed toward the selected target?
What we do is initially we point the vehicle at the target, and we hold the vehicle within about a degree pointing at the target, and then the IPS just has a little bit better accuracy at pointing. And so it continues to train and take care of any vibrations that we might have. And then the instruments themselves also have some compensation. And we can actually detect movements of astronauts moving around by pulling on ladders and see that that actual motion can be detected and in many cases just damped out.
Maria, your question.
Assuming that you're able to collect good data on primordial helium, will these data be helpful in the determination of the age of the universe?
I think you were asking about the helium abundance measurements. We've made quite a number of observations of a quasar, the purpose of which is to measure the amount of helium between us and the quasar. We're just using the quasar basically for a light bulb. And in measuring the amount of helium, if we understand what the helium abundance out in intergalactic space, which hasn't been modified by star formation and star evolution like the helium in the galaxy has been, then we can let the theoreticians put that back into their models. It turns out that the models which involve the early evolution, the formation, early evolution of the universe are highly dependent on the amount of helium that was present in the very early universe. And so we've made a lot of measurements, and hopefully we'd be able to shed some light on that.
Greg, your question?
Okay. What instruments have been used to observe volcanic activity on Jupiter's moon, Io? And what kind of data have you obtained? And also, what kind of adjustments have you had to make in switching from observing stellar objects to observing planetary events?
Yes, we've, with regard to the volcanic activity on Io, we've made quite a number of observations of the Jupiter system. Some of them of the torus, the so-called Io torus, which is a band of material around Jupiter through which Io, the moon Io, passes, and contains a lot of the ejecta and material from the volcanic activity on the moon. And so we have observed that. We have observed Io itself and the planet as well. And so all of these data together will hopefully allow us to shed some light on the details of the Jovian system.
Kit, your turn, your question.
One of the main aspects of this expedition is the study of white dwarf stars. What are you looking for in these stars, and what can we hope to learn from them?
Well, white dwarfs are one of the endpoints of stellar evolution, one of the possible endpoints. And what we're trying to do in a couple of cases, for example, the ultraviolet imaging telescope would like to see the population of white dwarfs, which exist in globular clusters, to try to characterize the evolutionary state of the cluster. One of the ways of studying what the evolutionary state of the cluster is, since we can't watch it evolve because it takes far too long for us, what we do is look at different clusters and study how many stars in each cluster are in the different evolutionary states. And so the white dwarf end of the stellar evolutionary scale is one that's difficult to study in that region, and it's something that we're trying to do a lot more of on this flight.
Anthony, your question.
Knowing the amount of primordial helium-4 left in the universe has a bearing on Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Were you able to get readable readings of the helium-4 density?
Well, this is back to the helium question. The detection of the helium is going to be, the helium absorption edge is going to be difficult, and the signal to noise is very, very low on each individual observation, and so we're making many, many observations with the intent of co-adding them together after the flight in order to increase the signal to noise ratio to make the edge visible. I don't think, I'm not sure whether we can see it on one spectrum or not. We just see the raw data available here on board, and it's certainly not processed at all. So I don't think we'll know the answer to that until after the flight, because all of the spectra of the quasar 1700 plus 64 will have to be added together after the flight in order to get sufficient signal to noise to see that feature.
Terry, your question?
I was wondering, will you be able to obtain evidence during this mission to support the existence of dark matter?
I don't think that we're sure at this point. And as Ron said, we really don't have access to an awful lot of the data that's being taken, and certainly not to any process data.
Maureen, your question?
The status report on day number 9 of the mission mentions an observation of a middle-aged supernova remnant, the sinus loop, with the intent to study the shock wave which follows supernova explosions. Do we know for how long these shock waves go on? And how exactly do you observe the effects of the shock wave as it rushes through the intergalactic medium?
Well, we have two instruments which primarily look at, we've been looking at the Cygnus loop, several positions in the Cygnus loop during the course of the mission, and the two instruments that are primarily looking at that are the Hopkins Ultraviolet Telescope and the Ultraviolet Imaging Telescope. And at different wavelengths, you see features in the shock wave which occur at different velocities. And so by looking at different parts of the shock wave at different wavelengths, we can tell something about how the shock wave is being propagated through intergalactic space, or interstellar space in this case. It's not intergalactic space, and try to extrapolate back to learn something about the details of the supernova explosion itself.
Alan, you have a follow-up question?
On day number 5 of the mission, the team observed a binary star system, Nova Oculi, which seemed to become much brighter over a short period of time. What measurements did you make of this phenomenon, and how will your data help to resolve questions on stellar evolution?
I'm sorry, there's an awful lot of feedback, and the first part of your question was completely garbled. Could you repeat at least the first portion of that?
On the 5th day of the mission, the team observed a binary star system, Nova Oculi, which seemed to become much brighter over a short period of time. What measurements did you make of this phenomenon, and how will your data help to resolve questions on stellar evolution?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the details of that observation. We have probably 100 scientists on the ground who have scientific programs that we're trying to satisfy the data requirements for. And those of us on board, although we're familiar with some of them and would like to be familiar with all of them, we just can't possibly do that. So we've observed so many targets, I'm just afraid I'm not familiar with that particular one.
Gentlemen, thank you very much, and safe return to Earth. Houston, this is Fairfield. Houston, this is Fairfield.
Houston, go ahead.
This concludes the event at Fairfield. Well, thank you very much.
Fairfield University, this is Houston. Thank you for your insightful questions and your interest in the space program. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Fairfield, and we're sorry to have been bouncing around here a little bit, but we had an orbiter maneuver kicking off, and we've been chasing that around. But your questions were excellent, and we hope to get a chance to chat with you again.
There we go. C-SPAN, our Endeavor. This is C-SPAN. Can you hear me? This is not Brian.
We have you loud and clear, Brian. This is Endeavor.
Okay. The next voice you hear will be our host, Brian Lamb. You ready?
Ready.
Three of those will be devoted primarily to space station operations.
I understand we have on the screen here in about 2 seconds Tammy Jernigan and Sam Durrance, and I'll ask both of you, how's it going up there?
Well, Brian, it's going great. We're taking observations, moving from target to target, looking at everything from planets and stars to galaxies that are billions of light years away, so it's been a fine mission so far. Sam?
Yeah, that's right, Brian. I'll just echo that. It's going great. We're just circling around the Earth once every 90 minutes, observing about 2 targets per orbit, and we're just clicking right along.
Before we grab the first call, let me read you a fax from a Don Reardon in Chicago, and remember, this is a show that deals with tough questions. And this question is, are you, and this is addressed to you all, are you at all embarrassed by these media interviews and public relations dog and pony shows constantly thrust upon shuttle crews by NASA bureaucrats? Shuttle missions cost American taxpayers at least $50,000 per minute of flight time. So how did public relations get to be such a mission prior to priority for busy shuttle crews?
Well, I'll give the case we're doing of the interview right now. Right now we're taking observations, and so this interview is scheduled on a non-interference basis with the data we're taking right now, and so the taxpayers are getting good value for their money. In addition, it is America's program, and I think America has a right to know what we're doing in space, and so I'm really happy to be part of the mechanism to disseminate information to the American public, and we do try to schedule these events so they don't negatively impact our operations.
Let's go then to the first call for our 2 special guests from space. Grand Rapids, Michigan. You're first up. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm 10 years old, and I'm just wondering, how did you get involved in the space program?
I'll answer that first, and then I'll hand it over to Sam. I was getting a PhD in astrophysics. I always liked science and math, and I was interested in flying, and I thought NASA was just a fascinating organization, and I applied and was fortunate enough in 1985 to get selected to fly in space. Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. Well, I was studying physics and astrophysics in school, in college, and I went to work at Johns Hopkins University, and I helped to design and build one of the telescopes that we have out in the cargo bay right now, and I came along to operate that, and I've been doing that for several years, and that's how I got involved.
Tammy Jernigan is on the left of your screen as you're watching from space. She's from Chattanooga, Tennessee originally, and Sam Durrance considers Tampa, Florida to be his headquarters. Let's go next to Wheeling, West Virginia. Go ahead with your question.
I'd just like to ask our astronaut guests, I would like to know, have some kind of a brief synopsis of the training that you have to go through to get the job that you're doing.
Well, the training varies from position to position. My position is payload specialist, and my training primarily is on how to operate the payloads. I help to design and build them and go through all of the testing procedures so that I thoroughly understand the operation of the payload. And then I train also to operate some of the systems on board that I need to live and work and to operate the payload itself. And Tammy is a mission specialist. Her training is a little bit different.
Yeah, the way my training differs, I train on all the orbiter systems. I train to do spacewalks. We do not have a planned spacewalk on this flight, but we do have a contingency spacewalk. And so if we needed to do that, we would suit up and go outside, John Gladstone and myself. I spend a lot more time training on all the orbiter systems, whereas Sam would spend a lot more time training on the payload, since I'm considered a career NASA astronaut.
One quick question, we'll go to calls. Norm Thagard, one of your colleagues, is going to be launched from Russia at 1:13 a.m. on Tuesday. Will you all see him on that Mir satellite up there somewhere in the next few days?
unfortunately, we won't. Actually, we had hoped that the commander of our flight, Steve Oswald, who had flown with Norm on a previous shuttle flight, would be able at least to talk to him. And we'd only be able to do that if we extended a day or so. But we won't get to see Norm, but we sure wish him well and wish him a wonderful trip on the Earth.
San Bernardino, California, you're next up. Go ahead, please.
Hi. I would like to ask them their feelings on seeing the edge of the universe, the black hole, through the ultraviolet telescope.
Thanks.
Well, we don't actually see the edge of the universe ourselves through the ultraviolet telescopes. The data we have on board is data that we can make sure that the telescopes are working correctly. The seeing of the edge of the universe is done by looking at the data once we get it back to the ground, and we analyze the data. When we look out through the telescope, we're looking out through basically a TV camera, and that camera is used to precisely point the telescope. So we're looking at the edge of the universe, so to speak, and that's exciting. We know that, but we don't actually see anything like that through the telescopes.
If you look out your window right now, what do you see down here on Earth? Where are you?
Okay, it's sunrise over the Pacific Ocean. We're approaching the coast of South America, and sunrises are incredibly beautiful things, and we see about 16 of those every day, and you can see all of the colors of the rainbow, the scattered light off of the various layers of the atmosphere. It's just beautiful.
Next call, Old Hickory, Tennessee. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Tammy and Sam. I'm glad to talk to you. My question is that people have mentioned extraterrestrials. They've mentioned the big space boom, but none have put on the theory of God created the Earth, and are you looking into that?
We're not specifically looking into the theory of God creating the Earth. I certainly believe that God created the Earth and set the universe in motion, and we're just trying to understand the physical laws and all the fascinating objects inside the universe He created.
Granite City, Illinois, next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering for the both of you, when you were small, were you influenced by your parents or anybody to study space or science?
Caller, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 12, and I'm really looking forward to a career up there on the shuttle or the station once it finally gets up.
I think that in my family, my mother certainly encouraged me to pursue the things I was interested in and gave me a real sense of self-confidence that I could do anything I wanted to do if I just kept at it. And there are a lot of wonderful careers in the space program, even if you don't grow up to be an astronaut, and I certainly wish you the best in that. The space program depends on the talents of many scientists and engineers who work very hard, and I think one just has to be persistent, and there's a lot of wonderful things to do in this world.
Yeah, I certainly have been influenced by my parents when I was growing up. They taught me to study hard and to believe that I could do things, and it has helped me throughout my life.
Next call, Atlanta, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm 11 years old, and I was wondering what you guys eat for breakfast.
Well, this morning, let's see, I had scrambled eggs and granola and coffee, and I think that's it. It's the scrambled eggs. They come in little plastic packages, and we have to fill them with water, but it's pretty good.
Houston, Texas, you're next.
This is Cheryl again. I wanted to know if either of you envisioned this becoming a world project where you had other astronauts entering into these projects, and we got world financial support, so a lot of these grand ideas wouldn't be squashed because of lack of funds. What do you feel about this?
Well, I think international cooperation in space is a wonderful thing, and the space station project that we have embarked upon with the Russians is really right to the heart of the point you're making, where two countries combine their resources on a great space adventure, which is space station, and someday we might even do more than that, go on maybe back to the moon, back to Mars. But I think international participation is going to be the wave of the future in the space program. And we can't all pool our resources and derive a world benefit from space exploration.
Dover, Delaware, you're next for our astronauts. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I was wondering how fast you're going.
Well, right now we're traveling 17,500 miles an hour. It's pretty fast. But from up here, at times it looks like you're just kind of rolling very slowly around the Earth, or sometimes it even feels like the Earth is rolling slowly under us.
Rebecca, how old are you?
8.
8 years old. Would you like to go in space?
Yes.
Thanks for calling. Prescott, Arizona, you're next.
Thank you very much.
You're on the air. Go ahead with your question, Prescott.
Good morning.
Good morning, Prescott. Please ask your question of our astronauts.
I'd like to know if there's any chance that the astronauts will be sent on a nationwide tour so they can visit students who have been working in the SAREX program.
Thanks.
Well, I don't think there's a chance that we'll be sent on a nationwide tour, but we do visit students quite often in schools, and I think almost all of us get a lot of enjoyment out of that, talking particularly to young people and, showing them the excitement of spaceflight.
We have 2 minutes, 3 minutes left here. Greer, South Carolina, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. What I'd like to know is, with the ultraviolet camera, are you looking at any planets besides the moon? I know that you've already looked at the moon, and they said it was like trying to catch a picture with a moving car. But have you looked at any of the other planets? And we just think you're doing a great job up there, and we love every one of you and hope you get to go up a million times.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you very much. And yes, we have looked at other planets. In fact, just the previous shift, we looked at both the planet Venus and the planet Mars, and earlier in the mission we have looked at the planet Jupiter. And so we have looked at the moon, Jupiter, Venus, and Mars, all three.
Delray Beach, Florida, you're next.
Good morning. Just want to say how proud we are that you people are up there, and I wish our young people in the country would use you people as an example rather than Madonna and some of these baseball stars. And we just had an opportunity to visit the Kennedy Space Center, so we saw some of the instruments and some of the other objects. Do each one of you know all the instruments that are on the board, or are there certain areas?
Thanks.
Well, I train on both the instrument pointing system, which is the platform we use to precisely point the instruments, and then also on the HUT, WHOOPI, and UIT instruments on those telescopes. But my knowledge is not as detailed as Sam. Sam's emphasis is on the telescopes, and mine would be on the orbiter systems and the instrument pointing system.
We go next to Pittsburgh. Running out of time. Go ahead, Pittsburgh.
Howdy. How do you compensate for motion of the astronauts versus shaking the scope, and how hard is it on your thermal balance when you're pointed like that for a long period of time?
Well, there's a compensation system on the telescopes themselves. There are gyro packages and optical star trackers, and there's a control system that tries to compensate for vibration of the shuttle, motion of the shuttle, and things like that. And pointed at deep space all the time, it gets kind of cold during the night passes.